Hello and welcome to MIP TV. With me, as always, is Bob Cook for his regular book reviews. And we've got a right back to basics book today, Bob. Freud and Beyond, Stephen A. Mitchell and Margaret A. Black, 2016, if I'm correct. And it's all about contemporary views of Sigmund Freud. What's it all about, Bob?
Yeah, I was on holiday, just come back. I was actually in Fuerteventura in the Canary Islands. And very sadly, you might think, I took some of these psychoanalytical books with me. And I picked this book up because it's by two giants of the contemporary psychoanalytical movement. Stephen Mitchell has just died, and Margaret Black, who is still going with Atwood and Storrow. And they really are the sort of leaders, if you like, of the contemporary psychoanalytical movement. And what grabbed me about this particular book is really what I'm going to call the Post-Freudian Movement. So that's after Freud died in 1939. And after he died, there's, of course, a big void and space for people to move into. And Stephen Mitchell came along, I think, in the 1950s. And with Storrow, Atwood started to revise and reformulate the earlier Freud ideas. So his idea, for example, Freud, of the isolated mind. In other words, the mind is an isolated framework. Rather than living in the world of intersubjectivity or relational frameworks, it's a neutral, isolated mind. And therefore, the way that he treated that isolated mind was through expert interpretation, if you like, as the major technique of cure. And interpretations, there was no intersubjectivity or relational framework to it.
Yeah, so the analyst would only use the word analysand in those days, didn't they? Almost like an object of curiosity, something, right. Something to be observed and kind of postulated about, as opposed to building any form of relationship.
Correct. And of course, you and I know, since the Northcote huge research came out in the 1780s, published late 1980s and beginning of the 1990s, showing that despite the relationship is so important to cure, which goes against very starkly the idea of the isolated mind of Freud. Yeah. So gradually, since the 50s and 60s, really anyway, the major concepts, as I've just been said, was revised and reformulated for contemporary psychoanalysis. And one of them, of course, is what I've just said. So now you've got this concept of intersubjectivity, which is brought into modern literature by the post-Freudians, who talk about how important the relationship is, the space between the client and the analyst. So nowadays, for example, they don't have couches. Couches have gone. You sit in the space between you and the chairs. And there's a lot of emphasis on, with modern contemporary psychoanalysis, intersubjectivity and the relationship between the two of you, which is very different from Freudian days.
Well, it was, wasn't it? I'd presume the bow tie, the beard and the German accent, not that we have anything against German, has disappeared as well. And I suspect the opening gambit isn't "tell me about your mother" either.
No, it's very, very much intersubjectivity, which is about the space between the two subjects, client, analyst, and the transference is in the here and now. So if you remember me talking about relational transaction analysis,
yes,
it's all about being in the here and now. Lena Harkin and Charlotte Sills, that famous book, Relational Transaction Analysis, talked about the transferences being reworked in the present. Yeah, same with contemporary psychoanalysis. So Helena Hargaden, who had a whole Jungian analysis, of course, I think brought some of the contemporary psychoanalysis ideas into transaction analysis in 2008.
Yeah, so I guess the idea there is when you talk about reworking the transference, it's about acknowledging there is transference, and for the therapist, if it's from the client side, to be really clear and say, "I'm not your mother, father,
Correct.
whatever that is," and to bring the client into the here and now, which is a bit contrary, isn't it, really, to Freudian ideas, which were
that's what I'm saying. There's been a complete revisioning and reformatting of policies that Freud brought up. Is very, very different contemporary psychoanalysis of today. And this book reminded me of how different contemporary psychoanalysis is today from the Freudian ideas. Another one, for example, one of the major techniques Freud talked about, which is central to his ideas, is the concept of free association, letting the client just talk, and with that, the idea of interpretation being a major technique by the analyst, maybe no more than 2 or 3 interpretations of the free association as a way of interpreting the transference for cure. Nowadays, this is a huge change from interpretation. Nowadays, you have psychoanalytical inquiry, which is very near phenomenological inquiry, rather than 2 or 3 interpretive techniques.
Yeah, so I think what we're really saying here, Bob, is that in the past, classic Freud, Freud himself would have listened to what the person was saying, free association, say the first thing that comes into your mind, and then they would construct a kind of diagnosis from that, and then give the person a label, and hence we get the term Freudian slip, where someone uses one word when they mean another, and people go, "Oh, well, that's what was really on your mind." Nowadays, when you're talking of phenomenological, what we're talking about, I think, is instead of just kind of interpreting, we're actually asking the client, "What is wrong with you?" We're listening and going into their frame of reference. We're trying to see. Yeah, Rogers has managed to get in there, really, hasn't he? He's managed to sneak his way in.
He was very much interested in psychoanalysis, of course, Rogers.
Oh, yes.
Another big change, as I explored this book, was it was, how can I explain this? A myth, really, that if we go back to Freudian days, the idea of everything evolved in the psychoanalytical world from Freud. Now, of course, in the contemporary revisionist aspects, they talk about, no, not all ideas came from Freud. You've got Jung in there. You've got Adler in there.
Yes.
Many of even William Reich in there. You've got many of the analysts. So psychoanalysis wasn't just a creature of Freud, but it was an evolved process.
Yes, I mean, he had a collaboration with Carl Gustav Jung for a time, which was, by all accounts, a very prickly relationship. Story of Freud fainting and saying he thought that Freud was a representative of his father, tried to kill him. And they fell out over, I think, if I remember correctly, they fell out over the nature of subconscious. Freud believed it was an individual experience, where Jung thought we had a collective subconscious.
That's absolutely correct. That's what they did fall out over.
Yeah.
But this book talks about the contemporary psychoanalysis of Stephen Mitchell, Margaret Black, Starrow, and Atwood, talking about, no, it isn't just, the history of psychoanalysis isn't just one man.
Yes. Of course, Wilhelm Reich was very famous. Alder, very famous. I suppose, is Morano in there at some point, Bob, do you think?
I don't know. I can't remember what psychoanalysts they were talking about, but I would think so. William Rank would be there.
Yeah.
And Ferenczi would be there. And they were the giants of the psychoanalysis movement. It wasn't just one man.
Yeah.
That's a myth. So there's a lot of talking about and honouring the elders of the psychoanalytical movement, not just the obsession with Freud.
Yes. An interesting fact, Wilhelm Reich was the inspiration for Kate Bush's song Cloudbusters, because he used to make cloud-busting machines.
I knew that, but I didn't know it was the inspiration for it.
Yeah, it was the inspiration for it. Yeah, she wrote the book. She read his son's book, Peter Reich, A Book of Dreams, which was written about his father, and that is where she wrote the song Cloud Dusting. So a little two penny fact.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but it's very interesting for students. This book, I think.
Yeah.
To look at how we've got a movement now which is calling itself contemporary psychoanalysis, and has revised or changed some of the pillars of the Freudian movement. So we've got a post-Freudian movement, a bit like a post-Bernian movement. So it's interesting.
Absolutely, and of course, a lot of students are introduced to Freud in quite a negative light, and I think that's a bit unfortunate, really, because he was a man of his time, but also I think it negates the fact that, as we've discussed, Freudian ideas have developed, matured, been revisioned, and it's still a contemporary therapy. It's still practiced by people, good people, ethical people. It's just practiced in a very different way to the way Freud visioned it.
Yeah, so I really recommend that book.
So there we have it, Freud and Beyond, Stephen A. Mitchell and Margaret A. Black. Go downstairs into the comments bar, and we'll put a link in so that you can inspect and buy the book, and have a look at that.
Book 83. Review number 83.
83. Well, there we go, Bob. We're going through them. I'm surprised your house manages to stay up with all the books you've got. But there we go. Book review 83. And as always, have a look, inspect the book. And as always, Bob Cook, thank you very much.
Thank you.